unfortunately is not me, but panelists that we're going to be inviting up on stage. And we're really going to be talking about the global market shakeup, as what Tondi likes to refer to it as. And that's all things Trumponomics, GNU, geopolitics, politics, and everything else that's happening around the world. And it's really an exciting time, especially for Exness, that's making a serious amount of money on the volatility side. But we'll hear from Terence from Exness as well, just to understand exactly, I mean, obviously that's how they afforded to pay for this dinner, because of the volatility. But we're going to hear from the experts about those various topics. And so I'd like to invite each of them on stage. We have Krieger Naiker, our tax specialist. Maybe he's behind keeping VAT flat, so let's give him a round of applause. Hywell George, Director of Investments, a very familiar face on S Group. He does all the market outlook and the videos. And then Terence Hove, financial market strategist at Exness, and the man that paid for this dinner. Paul. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Howell, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You're in the hot seat because you're sitting in the middle. So I'll start with you. And I think the biggest topic of the day and of the year really has been Trump. Every time I open my Twitter feed or YouTube or any conversation that one has with anyone is about Trump. And I think when it comes to Trump, a lot of people ask, what is the plan and what's the end goal? Almost every news outlet in the States and even locally, because it does feel like, depending on which side of the bed he woke up on, he just makes a decision of some sort. Yeah. Not just about countries, but also about penguins. So what is the plan in your view?
Okay, evening. Spoiler alert, there is a plan. I know it's hard to believe amidst the chaos, and I will make a quick disclaimer, which is, I've been a professional investor for almost 40 years now. My job is to attempt to predict what is likely to happen next, not what I'd like to happen next. Okay? So Trump is a very emotive figure, and everyone's got opinions. I'm trying to convey what I think is happening, as opposed to what I like or not like. But what I'm clear about is that there is a plan. And the framing of that is there seems to be a problem in America. And the problem in America is that we have a very unequal society where the elites are making all the money from outsourced production. We have a government which has become far too large. For example, in terms of government debt, $36 trillion. Most people know that now. It took the US 220 years to get to its first $1 trillion of debt. It's now adding $1 trillion of debt every 90 days. So the US is bankrupt. So the government size has to come down, hence Doge, hence Musk. It's all been pretty brutal, but something had to be done about the government. And the flip side of that is that the private sector in America has to do better. So the idea is, to put it simply, you fire government employees, they go to the private sector and are productive. So Trump is trying to reset the domestic economy from government to private sector. Part of that is making the private sector more competitive globally, hence the tariffs. And did anyone see the speech on 2nd of April, Liberation Day? Holding the board up like a primary school teacher with some tariffs on it. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen. And the calculation of the tariffs was a joke, but it got to where Trump wanted to get to, which was, I'm going to put really big tariffs on you. And if you don't like him, you've got to come see me. And he worked a treat. South Africa, 30%. We'll get on the next flight over. Cambodia, Vietnam, 45%. Poor things. Next flight over. So they've now got 75 countries negotiating tariffs. And it is true to say that the US, pre-April the 2nd, has charged less for imports than they get charged for exports. So it has been an unfair playing field, to be fair. So that reset of global trade in terms of making US manufacturing more competitive in terms of export markets and maybe some onshoring while you're at it. So that's the reset of the domestic economy. And at the same time, he's trying to redo the world order. The world order was already changing. And we can talk about spheres of influence and Russia and Ukraine and China, etc. But the big story is twofold. Number one, bring Russia back into the world system. And that's why the initial peace negotiations on Ukraine took place between America and Russia. It was a conversation in terms of how Russia is going to come back into our lives. That's the big news. Ukraine, for all the terrible suffering, is a sideshow. And secondly, in terms of China, the tariff thing is for Trump to push back on China and come to some accommodating deal. Because China was winning the multipolar world order already through the Belt and Road Initiative, and America can't afford to have China winning forever. So that's a pushback strategy. A lot of things are happening all at once, which is why it's chaotic, but that's the plan. That's floored you.
Wow. And I just want to maybe, Cregan, to move over to you. As a tax specialist, if you could just enlighten us on the tariff intervention, because that seems to be quite topical as well. And just for some of us who are not necessarily tax specialists in the room, or even finance savvy, if you could also just simplify why tariffs, why that strategy. I don't think you need to simplify it to the point of elementary school on that board that he put up, but in your view, why did he use tariffs as a mechanism for intervention?
Hi. So tariffs is basically a tax on import of goods into a country. The easiest way to get in revenue is to look at your top line. So when you look at your income statement, your revenue, if you can just tax revenue on top, you won the game. You don't need to go look at the bottom and look at your profits, because everything in between is eroding away your profits, all your expenses. So it was a very easy mechanism just to say, guys, we're going to import goods. We're going to just go to top line to reduce our deficit. Quick, easy approach. Create disorder, chaos, confusion in the market, all at once. And now let's start negotiating. Perfect strategy.
And on that negotiation, I can imagine the financial markets have been chaotic. And just from your perspective, Terence, as the financial market specialist, what's been the impact on all the different components of the financial markets, both globally and domestically here in South Africa?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting aspects of financial markets at the moment is best captured in that phrase. It's the best of times and it's the worst of times. I think we've heard the various strategies that are being implemented. And of course, from where we sit is Exness and seeing, market participants being there. And markets really capture the sentiment really well. If we look at the price of gold right now, it's trading at an all-time high. And what does it mean for the ordinary man on the street? It means that it's extremely risky at the moment, but volatility is very good for markets. And just on the gold trade, as we were speaking earlier on with Haywell, when we look at November the 4th, when we had that Trump trade, and markets were green throughout. So I think markets are really capturing the sentiment really well. The rand does extremely well, being an emerging market currency, and other rand-denominated assets. It's one of the most amongst the most traded currencies globally. I mean, through the various trading sessions from Asia to Europe to New York. So it catches the sentiment really well, which is also, measured quite well in gold. We had a long weekend, for example, the past Easter weekend, and you saw a lot of flow going into gold on that long weekend. To that point, you don't know when the headline is going to come out, you don't know when the tweet is going to come out. Gold is really capturing that safe haven asset class value really, really, really well at the moment. So there's a lot of volatility, a lot of risk, a lot of uncertainty. Business executives as well have come out and said we've got earnings season coming out in the US. That's going to also give a highlight or an insight as to what companies are seeing. And I think central banks, we've heard our own central bank governor, Lesesha Kganyago, mentioning how the outlook has become inflationary. So that's where we are, and that's what we're getting from markets at the moment, through the various instruments and asset classes, as they tick up and down. And it's a good indicator of where the global temperature and sentiment is around, everything that's currently happening.
Do you believe that there was market manipulation? You can say we're in a safe space. So we're very, very far from the US. So I just hear from MCNBC market manipulation, and insider trading.
Yeah. Look, the president has spoken. He's mentioned a few headlines, if we can call it that. Traders keep an eye on headlines. So that's all it is, headlines.
Okay. But on Truth Social or X or Facebook?
You need to follow the social media and follow the headlines that really have that direct impact on financial markets. So everything, follow that, where the headlines are going to come out, where certain announcements are going to come out. I remember the first administration, non-farm payroll, one of the best traded, amongst the best traded events in financial markets. And you just see a tweet maybe an hour or so, or a few hours before the actual print comes out and says, because the president gets to look at the numbers first. And he says, numbers are looking good. So guess where your trade needs to be before the print hits? So hence, when you follow the headlines and where the headlines are coming out, it really makes a difference. Is it market manipulation? It's headlines.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good answer. So Howell, I want to actually follow your line of thinking around Russia. You mentioned bring Russia back into the global economy. Can you unpack that a bit more?
Sure. So there's well, to be clear, we're going from a position of US hegemony, i.e. US control, to a multipolar world where it's every man for himself or every woman for herself. And that's why it gets a little bit chaotic. Where Russia fit into this is that within that world, Russia and China have piled up and are in danger of becoming a dominant sphere of influence against the US. So the Russia play is that Russia needs to get closer to the US than it is today to prize them a little bit away from China. That's the first point. And the Americans are talking to the Russians now, as we speak, in fact, for the first time in 3 years. Because Joe Biden did not place a call to President Putin since the invasion of Ukraine. And the one thing you do when you are under conflict with someone, you place a call and you back channel. And that was one of the, I won't get into Biden right now, but that was not smart, in my view. So that conversation between America and Russia is really important. And when we do finally get a peace deal, which is now on the table, which, if you guys haven't read it, will be Russia retains its land within Ukraine, including Crimea. It gets access to the Black Sea, which is where the Russian fleet is based. And the Black Sea is so important to Russia because it is its route to the Mediterranean and warm water. And Russia only has one warm water port all year round, and it's in the Black Sea. That's why Crimea is so important to Russia. So they will retain that. Ukraine will not join NATO. There will not be European boots on the ground. And the US will get their minerals deal. And that will be the de facto security guarantee. So that'll go through. When the peace deal is signed, it will be signed, I suspect, in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, as hosted by Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia. And the reason it'll be signed there is because part of Trump's play is to bring the Middle East back into play in that Russia-Middle East axis, where Saudi Arabia is the new power broker of the Middle East, along with Israel. The Palestinian situation will have to be sorted in some way. Iran gets neutralized. And that's the grand bargain for the Middle East. The other reason to get Russia back in is to get the oil price down, which is already working, because you want Russian oil piping again, in terms of export markets. So bring the oil price down because that's a promise to the US consumer. Get Russia back in the game. Prize them away from China a little bit. So you have three spheres of influence. What I'll call the North Atlantic Alliance, which is the US, Arctic, down to the Panama Canal, that's why it's important, and Europe. Russia, Middle East, kind of Eurasia, and China and Asia. That's the play.
But if I just think about those three structures, or call it geographies, where does BRICS fit in? I've heard schools of thought that Trump is also trying to break up BRICS in a way. I mean, partially because China is getting a lot stronger, more influential, and very close to Russia, and now Iran's come into play, and South Africa, and all the other BRICS countries, and there's just a lot of noise around BRICS and a lot of excitement. But where does Trump and BRICS come into play?
Well, this is why J.D. Vance was in India this week and announcing the outlines of trade deals. So again, that's bringing India back into the sphere of influence of the North Atlantic. BRICS was getting BRICS Global South, call it what you wish, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Belt and Road Initiative. So the rest of the world outside the G7, basically, was looking like it was going to win. So it's a pushback on BRICS, it's a pushback on the Global South. It's splitting up those power blocks within the Global South and reestablishing some form of US standing in the world. And the US has and had pulled back from its position in the world. I mean, that withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 was America saying, we are withdrawing from the Middle East, we're done. Who moved into the Middle East? Russia and China. The year after America pulled out of Afghanistan, China invested $10 billion rebuilding what the US had broken in Afghanistan. So the US is trying to push back on that, bring Saudi back into the fold, and reestablish some US influence, which is waning very, very badly. But one point I'll add, again, this is hopefully a kind of quasi-factual comment. The phrase Trump is breaking the world order is a very popular one right now, and there's certainly some truth behind that. The world order was already changing well before Trump came in. This is Trump's reaction to the world order breaking down.
And in your mind, who are going to be the winners and who are going to be the losers?
China will win.
Short term and long term?
Long term. China has most of the cards. It's got most of the money. It's got the political structures. It's got 1.4 billion people, which is 4.5 times that of America. Its military now, its naval force is the largest in the world. Its military is the largest in the world in terms of personnel. It's way ahead in technology, if anyone's not clear about that. There's a study by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. And the Australians are fairly independent arbiters, I would say. And they measure technological prowess across 64 categories, covering robotics, AI, etc. Of those 64 categories, China is ahead of the US in 58 of them. So China's winning in all spheres. and will be probably the dominant world power within 10 years.
Okay, guys, everyone learn Chinese now.
Are there any Chinese here, by the way?
Okay.
Are there any Chinese in the room? That's a shame, actually. Okay.
Just from, Krigan, to move over to you, from a policy perspective globally, with regards to tax, I mean, how do you see that playing out? What is international tax's role in all these potential regulation changes and shifting global landscapes?
I'll talk from a domestic front, what's applicable to us very shortly, which would be AGOA. AGOA is up for renewal now in September, and that's our effective free trade with America. So we export to America a number of things, and the sectors that would be hurt by these tariffs would be agriculture, and we supply our wine industry to them, and our grapes, and our citrus. That market will be hurt should those tariffs escalate or stay at 30%, and if there's no deal. Automotive scene, our export market is massive there. We will hurt further. But predominantly, most of our, textiles is the other one, clothing, textiles will hurt there. And we employ a lot of labor when it comes to that. So domestically, there will be a lot of job losses should we not get a price competitive arena happening. For the most part, our exports will be on minerals, but that will be platinum, rhodium, chrome, and a lot of that is exempt. So we're safe on that front, and we will get our money. So labor is going to be an issue for us should we not secure the AGOA deal.
What do you think the chances of securing AGOA are?
Okay.
In your mind? And should we not secure it, what are the alternatives? I read the headline the other day that South Africa wines are looking at China as a potential export partner.
True. So not securing that deal, it's pretty much up to America to say whether they want us in or not. I don't think we have a say. Well, then that creates opportunity for us to look elsewhere, to the rest of the world. And that market may be with our partners in BRICS, or maybe in other territories that have not experienced our products, and we can channel new partnerships with the rest of the world.
And Terence, if I could ask you the same question just around trade, what do you think would happen from a financial markets perspective with AGOA if AGOA doesn't go ahead?
Well, I think that the RAND captures that. I think to that point, Trump has suspended some tariffs for those countries that have come out and said, let us have the conversation. There was about 75 of them, if I recall that number. So if that doesn't work out for us in terms of negotiating, which ultimately it comes down to, so it will be South Africa saying we are not going to go and have a conversation with the US, and I don't think that's a good idea, so probably, that will be a worst case scenario where that's not negotiated, or there's no new, I think there's going to be likely a new version of it, but should the worst happen in that sense, I think because of the effect it has on these different sectors within the economy, you'd see it being played out in the South African rand. It would tell you what traders are thinking of the risk factor of South Africa in terms of, how the economy will either be hurt, remain resilient, or growth from a better version of the AGOA.
So guys, I actually want to bring this back home to South Africa And maybe starting with a question around, and how I'll pick on you for this one, the role of South Africa within the global geopolitical landscape in terms of its role. Historically, we've always had fairly good relationships with everyone, actually. So we're part of BRICS, we host in the G20, so formerly part of the G20. We've had good relationships with the West, with the US. We kind of tiptoeing, we're hosting Zelensky this morning. We had a call with Russia on Monday. We kind of, I don't know, it feels like we're all over the place. But what is South Africa's role going to look like? And where do you see us going? What's Cyril's plan? Kind of know what Trump's plan is, but what's Cyril's plan? And how well is he playing it?
So in terms of foreign policy, South Africa has generally played quite a smart game in terms of being friends with everybody. I think that's a smart play. South Africa started to get that wrong about 4 years ago and shifted too far anti-US and anti-UK and pro-China and pro-everything else which the US didn't like, including Palestine, etc. And that kind of move towards China and the global south was too pronounced. And at the same time, they severed ties with the US and UK governments, effectively. I mean, the UK stroke US, are there any press here? No, okay. So the UK and US ambassadors couldn't get meetings with the South African government for a period of 18 months. That's just really not smart. And so AGOA got onto the agenda then in terms of, okay, well, you know, if you're not going to talk to us, we're going to cut this off. It's probably important to remember, and my friends are right in terms of the specific industries, but in terms of our South Africans' exports to the rest of the world, 8% of those go to America. So it's not like 50%, it's 8%. And AGOA is 2%. So AGOA's sentiment bad, yes, but it's really not the end of the world, apart from citrus farmers, which is bad. But in terms of the overall economy, it's not a disaster. In the last 18 months, South Africa has spent deliberate time rebuilding those bridges with the US and, I say UK, but I'll call it Europe. That's a much smarter move. Is America really still extremely annoyed with South Africa? Yes. The whole of Congress is really annoyed with South Africa for lots of reasons. And is there any chance of AGOA not being overturned? No. It's gone. It's done. The bigger threat to South Africa is sanctions. Ranging from sanctions on individual politicians, stroke people, up to full financial sanctions, Russia style. That's extremely dangerous.
Dangerous for who? For South Africa or for the US?
For South Africa. And that is a topic which is being talked about. Not in really serious terms yet, but it's being talked about. So that does concern me. If we can avoid that, what I would like to say is that from my point of view, and hopefully some other people's point of view, I'm very bullish on South Africa right now as an economy, and hopefully as a society as well. I've been here for 11 years. I'm from the UK. That's the first time in 11 years I've been bullish on South Africa. So I really think we can do great things in this country.
And Krigan, what's your take on South Africa and where its economy is right now? And you can touch on some of the taxation policies which have been overturned in the last 24 hours. But more so, what does it mean for the GNU? What does it mean from a political standpoint? What does it mean for us trusting government in its current form? Is the GNU going to survive at all after the decision that was made this morning?
Okay, personally, I'm glad we've got a GNU. We've got oversight and some form of accountability. Having extra eyes looking at the pie, that's always good. Grateful that we've got no VAT increase. I think looking at that, personally, I would feel my own opinion, that should you want to raise VAT, then as a government you would have failed the people. That means that you yourself were lacking. You didn't garner any economic growth. So you went to the people to collect revenue. And yeah, you should be held accountable. Looking at the 0% increase, and them saying that there was a deficit, now what would fund that deficit? Money has to come from somewhere. So what do we know from the budget? We know that a good amount of billion went to SARS for digitization and technology. And SARS is on a proper AI trajectory. With international tax, we've got treaties with a lot of countries. And the sharing of information is real. So your data that's housed in any financial institution outside of these borders, they are known to SARS. That information sharing happens annually, haphazard, whenever. They just give it out. So you are on a database. It's just a matter of when. And that comes down to technology. So with AI, looking at databases and cross-matching, referencing, it's very easy to actually collate your entire financial life. So that, I would say, in the short term, is where the money is going to come from. I doubt there's going to be any form of amnesty with regards to tax compliance. So we do have something called the VDP, the Voluntary Disclosure Program, where you can go to SARS and say, look, yeah, I do have money overseas, no taxes were paid, I'm coming, and no penalties and interest would be afforded. But you have to make the first move.
Do people actually do that?
Yes, they do.
They go and volunteer?
They have to, because
Okay.
There's little areas where, okay, I'll give you one example now. There's a certain country, tax haven-ish country, where
You obviously don't want to name it. Okay.
where they have actually
Access's head office is probably there or something.
where they have actually told all the South Africans that have their bank accounts there that you're no longer welcome here in our country, and you've got X days to kindly transfer all your money out. Okay, now I'll tell you what happened afterwards. The moment they transferred their money out, SARS sent them a letter. You owe us X amount of million. Million. That's an individual taxpayer. So that was unaccounted for money within the domestic environment because it wasn't reported on the tax return. It was sitting outside the system. There was a movement of funds from that jurisdiction to another jurisdiction. That bank reported to SARS, by the way, your taxpayer here moved the money over, just letting you know. And then SARS used that information to say, well, we're going to tax that entire as income. That's what happens. Now you have to go and prove otherwise.
So basically what you're saying is we have to pay our taxes.
I'm saying you need to be compliant, and compliance is two
So
things.
you don't have to pay, just be compliant.
No, just be compliant.
Just say you will pay at some point, but
All I'm saying is compliance is two things. One is submit your returns accurately and completely, and whatever liability there is, pay that. Because what would happen is you would lack on admin. So that is probably savings, for example. Okay, now you move savings from one jurisdiction to another. It's not a taxable event. You're just moving money around. But SARS would treat it as income because they don't know better. So admin is going to be something that will save you.
so when you leave your name tag, just put your number as well for any individuals wanting tax advice, right?
Let's chat about tax advice quickly. This is something that you guys need to know, actually. You get two types of tax individuals within the country. You got the guys that are very sharp with domestic tax law. And that's your normal tax practitioners. And they're the ones that do your tax returns. Most of them are really good. Then you get the guys that would do your international taxation, which is completely different. And just chatting earlier with regards to skill sets wise, and I was looking at it from a geographic sense and saying, well, South Africa is geographically right at the tip of Africa, the bottom. The only people south of us would be the penguins, and they're getting tariffed. So, yeah, but we don't trade with them. So I don't understand why they're getting tariffed. And to the north, I mean, we got SADC regions. I mean, there's no tariffs there. So we don't have a cross-border international tax issue. But now you got Europe, and Europe has many countries, and they've been doing cross-border trades for hundreds of years. So their tax professionals, other than having domestic tax knowledge, they've got cross-border international tax exposure, and they've been doing it for hundreds of years. We never had to. So our skill sets within the country, it's limited. So when you are doing international tax, when you are trading or moving abroad and setting up residencies or passports or double passports and backup plans, you should consult an international tax person, not a domestic tax person. Yeah.
Terence, what's your view on the South African economy? As a business community, uncertainty usually makes people panic. But at the same time, you've mentioned opportunities. And so what would be your insight in terms of us as a business community responding to all the economic activity that's happening right now? I mean, Howell is very bullish on the South African economy, first time in 11 years. Do you feel the same way, or do you feel otherwise? And what sense of comfort can you give people around the room?
A sense of comfort in the turmoil. Well, firstly, I think, South Africa has been extremely resilient. We would recall in 2021 with hyperinflation, or not hyper in the sense of, those double, like triple digits or anything like that, but inflation was quite hot globally because of COVID. We in South Africa had a full-on lockdown, and then post, the lockdown coming into 2021, inflation came back up. Now, you'd ask, why is it important for comfort to look far back then? Because what that means is our Reserve Bank actually acted a lot quicker than, for example, the US Fed when it came to fighting inflation. So that tells you that our stewards in the different institutions are very well aware and sensitive to the global economy at large. So you need that. You need that for a sense of comfort, because ultimately interest rates are affected into pricing, assets, various asset classes as well, including exchange rates. There's that interest rate differential between South Africa and the US. So if we come from 2021 to 2025 to 2025, we look at the previous inflation print. I think we're now on 2.7%. The previous was 3.2%. The market was expecting a 2.9%. That was the consensus. So inflation came out lower. And guess what? Global central banks are talking about synchronization of monetary policy. And what is the magic number? 2%. That's where the US Fed is pushing in terms of getting their inflation to that 2% handle and lower. And for South Africa,
so our inflation is more or less the same as the US,
well,
which is unheard of.
Yeah, we've done well. And we've done well considering that our midpoint is 4.5, between 3 to 6%. So that gives me comfort when I look at it from that perspective, that 4.5 is the midpoint. We're at 2.7%. So it gives the South African Reserve Bank more room. Would we like more interest rate cuts? Yeah, definitely from a consumer's perspective. And I mean, that means more money in your pockets. So you can imagine if the VAT had gone on at 15.5%, and the outlook for inflation is high, what that means, if the outlook for inflation is high, if it's inflationary, that would mean that the Reserve Bank is likely going to hike interest rates more than cut interest rates. Now, that puts a lot of constraint on everyone in the room. If you're earning the interest, that's a different story, because then you're earning more money on that. But ultimately, to stimulate that growth, you need the consumer to have more disposable income. So, that's the big chain reaction. So if you look at your earnings data, it's all driven by the consumer. If you look at the big retailers that have done very well in terms of their earnings, over the past quarter or the previous quarters ending 2024, you'd see that those are the ones that really managed to get their services and products to the consumer in the most cost-effective and efficient way. And that's all buying power, spending power that they'll be chasing from the consumer, from ourselves. When you go and buy bread or whatever product, fuel, all of that. So seeing our institutions being very forward-thinking, being able to respond adequately, even better than some of the developed central banks, that's really comforting to know that, look at the rand. We got to 20, now we're back at 18, call it 18 and a half. So that's very resilient. We're at 17 at some point, earlier in the year. And so in the midst of everything that is happening, trade policies, tariff wars, trade deals being negotiated, and we see where South Africa is right now. Yeah, I'm very optimistic. And it's an asset class that is doing really well when we look at South Africa from that perspective as well in financial markets.
Interest rates for the rest of the year? The central bank kept it unchanged in the most recent meeting.
They kept it unchanged, and unfortunately, because of that uncertainty around tariffs, that is what's now driving inflation fears. So we would recall, as I mentioned to that point, we came out of COVID, lockdown, and then there was a lot of spending. So that was an inflation driver. Then, as we are recovering from that, what then happened? We had the Russia-Ukraine crisis. That was a big inflation driver as well. That really broke the scale in various economies. So now, again, what do we have? We've got another driver, which is now tariffs. So if we look at interest rates at the end of the year, the Reserve Bank has said we will observe, what is happening, read the markets, understand where the pricing is of assets. And our meeting, the Fed moves first on the 7th of May. And then a few weeks after that, we move, if we are going to move, that's on the 29th of May, on the Thursday, when the MPC announces its interest rate decision. So because of that uncertainty...
Are we before or after Europe? And the ECB?
The ECB could be about the same time. I'll just need to check the dates again. Because they try to also not make the announcement too far apart. So everyone's, because you also have Bank of England as well, that's a very important one to keep an eye on, especially in the broader scheme of Europe as well. I think at the end of the year, it's as the data tells us what's happening within the economy. Is there growth within the economy? Is there a need for them to cut rates? We do have some room in as far as the inflation measure is concerned, but don't just look at the headline number alone. You also need to look at the core inflation as well, because that came out at 3.1%. So you also want that core inflation to come in lower, over and above just the headline figure. So I think it's going to be quite data dependent in terms of where exactly we'll end up compared to where we thought we would be in 2025 prior to the US election.
I'm going to open it up to the floor for any specific questions that anyone would like to ask. Megan has got a rolling mic, so if there's anyone that would like to ask a question to anyone in the panel, or to myself, but anyone in the panel, please feel free to stand or put your hand up. And if you could, as part of networking, if you could say who you are, who you represent, where you're from, and then you could ask any of the panelists a question. Anyone? Tough crowd. Tequilas? Okay. Wahid. Someone has to. He was a panelist last year, so.
Yeah, it's too quiet. All right, so let me say something to Howard. Howard, I'm firstly, like you, an optimist, particularly about the future of South Africa. One of the things that, we talk about the AGOA deal, and to your point that, actually it's a very small part of our GDP, and South Africans don't seem to understand that. But I think what perturbs me more than anything else is that often we're more worried about the commercial agreement than we are about the principles that we stand for, right? And if we look at the world, the global environment, I think America had the opportunity of being this benevolent leading power in the world. They had the biggest economy, or have the biggest militarily in terms of power. They just kind of got the control of so much that they had in their hands. They let it slip. And very much like the Chinese TikToker said, and I'm sure that's been made famous recently, when he said, whilst you guys were taking your money and your success and your power and putting it into military power, China was putting it into its people and building its cities and its infrastructure and its economy. And now America's past has tainted its possible future. And that has fractured the world. So you've got BRICS, you've got the emerging economies outside of the US's power, right? And that is now threatening them. And in the same vein, they're responding again in ways that's just upsetting the world, including now their allies. South Africa stands a little bit with some might and principle. And we as South Africans sometimes judge that and go, oh my God, we're going to lose AGOA. Oh my God, it's going to cost us money. Oh my God, it's... But at what point should South Africans become aware that perhaps we should be proud of our principles against someone who clearly didn't lead very well? What's your thoughts on that?
Okay. I was waiting for the question. I'll make a couple of observations on that, if I may. Before I lose it, I think the main point is that South Africa does have an enormous amount to be proud of. Many, that sounds a crazy thing to say, given what some of the stuff which goes on. But in terms of what I mean by that, in terms of the talent in South Africa, in this room, across the country, at all levels of society, it's just extraordinary. And one of the first things I had to do at Old Mutual when I came down was persuade the fund managers who reported to me that they were actually as good as the ones in London, because they didn't believe it. And South Africans are so humble, they don't believe how good they are. This is part of the reason I'm bullish on the economy, because I think that talent is going to be finally unleashed. Because pre-GNU, all I heard in the bars was, or the cafes, wherever I was, or restaurants, was, mostly bars, was, oh, this government is a disaster, how are they going to rip me off, for the next deal is going to be awful, I'm not even going to bother. Now it's, okay, let's do some stuff. And I see it all mutual, there's stuff happening everywhere. And there's also an enormous amount of investment coming into the country, particularly from Europe and the Nordics, and the States, actually, until recently. So there's an enormous amount of money matching the opportunity in South Africa. So that's a great thing. And I think we should stand with our heads held high with that kind of conversation, I agree. Could the US be a benevolent world power? It could be, but it's definitely not, and hasn't been for many decades. The US has been a belligerent, bullying power for decades. based on its 845 military bases worldwide in 90 different countries. And I could run through the history of that if you like, but 845 military bases is a lot. And so they dominate the entirety of the world and have done for a long time and have abused that power for a long time. So Trump is just another example of what the US does, actually. He's approaching it in a different way, a more visible and more brutal way, but in terms of what America did, particularly behind the scenes, in terms of world power, was pretty abhorrent. But that's just a fact. You know, global geopolitics is not nice and friendly. It's not actually about principles. It's about who's got the most power and how they wield that power. And Trump understands that, and he's using his leverage to push back and make America stronger again. That's his play. May work, may not, may backfire. If it backfires, then it's going to be a very interesting world we live in. But what I do know is that the world we all live in will be fundamentally different to the world today in the next 5 years.
Thanks. Next question. If you could just say your name so that everyone knows who you are. That's Wahid, by the way.
Sure, Teddy. That's Wahid, and this is Ed. You incidentally said 5 years. And when we speak of the global order and where it is, my question is democracy not the limiting factor? That's the one question. And then just, it's such an interesting time to be alive. What is the role of technology in terms of establishing a new world order? And how does that shift things? And have we even begun to understand the impact that that will have?
Shall I go with that, Tony?
Yeah.
I don't know who wants to cover that first.
So I think 2 points. So democracy is clearly under threat, not because of Trump, actually, but because democracy is not really working very well for people. And people have woken up to the fact that it's a 4-year cycle. You can't get much done in 4 years, and politicians will lie to you until they get back into power. And off we go again. So just the electoral system doesn't work very well. At the same time, the autocracies are doing really well. So China's winning. Actually, India's a democracy. We'll let that one go. Middle East is winning. Russia will soon be winning again. So that narrative doesn't fit very well in terms of the love of democracy. So I do worry about that. And I suspect we will creep more and more towards autocracy without us really realizing it. That's generally what happens. Again, just a fact. Technology will change, outside of all the comments we've all made so far, will change everything again. That's a totally different thing. And it'll change our lives in every single possible way you can imagine. I'll give you one example, which is actually not really AI, but it's CRISPR technology in terms of medical science, and the ability to gene edit our bodies to protect us from disease. And the first CRISPR technology was approved in the UK, actually, in September last year, to treat sickle cell disease in children. And so they are now gene editing children's bodies. And they can take out the piece of DNA, the strand of DNA, which causes sickle cell disease in future life. They did experiments on mice in Switzerland 3 years ago, and they identified the aging gene. And they replaced the aging gene with something more benign, and the mice got younger. So we'll have to get used to a world for our children's children that those children will live forever. Or will certainly have that option if they've got the money. It's a fundamentally different world, which will affect everything we do. That's just one example of what exponential growth does for us in technology.
Can I maybe address that question to Terence, yourself, and Cregan on what you think technology is going to do in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think from financial markets, certainly where we sit at Exness, because it's a fintech company, so a lot of the technology that's out there, we utilize it, including AI, way before the frenzy hit. We have a lot of that development within internally. So naturally with technology, as you sit in different banks or on different floors, you see the pricing coming on the systems. Now with different algorithms, it even makes certain spreads even tighter. I mean, you've got different algorithms that look for the best liquidity pool, right? So what that means is you're able to get to a better price for an asset class. For a particular asset class, you're able to take advantage of arbitrage, opportunities a lot quicker and identify them a lot quicker with technology. So the rate at which, for example, a very good example, in conversation with one of my colleagues earlier in the week, making $1 million is no longer as difficult as it used to be.
Oh, sure. Show me the secret. Give me your contact details after this. I'll share the secret with all of us.
Yeah, I mean, we were chatting a bit on it this afternoon, right? And for example, you utilize leverage. You catch the market again to those tools that you use to analyze the position. You see where the market is going. And we're not talking about hearsay things here, right? It's facts. The numbers are there. It's black and white. We see the number. We see X grew from this amount to that amount. It's there. So it's and there's always been this world of somehow, when they say smart money and fast money, and retail traders are smart, extremely, beyond what people envision, because it's yourself, you do the research, you do this, there's no restrictions at times. So that technology is increasing the rate at which people are earning and gaining liquidity. And it's at an exponential rate as well. So we're seeing that definitely at Exness and utilizing it as well.
Cregan, aside from the fact that you're going to be collecting more taxes,
You'll be collecting more taxes.
and no one can hide.
You'll be collecting a lot quicker. I'll say that much. It'll be more real time. I'll give an example on software. You guys are in business. Some of you got trust. So as a business, when you raise an invoice, you raise a VAT invoice. And the moment you raise it, that VAT is due and payable. And your software, be it Sage, Xero, whoever, will connect to the tax authority. And that money will just go from your bank account into SARS. That is now real time. It's very similar to how you get auto-assessed if you're a salaried earner. So we are moving more into real-time taxation. With regards to the trust, that's no more an annual thing. Once a year, you submit your tax on your trust. It's moving forward, the trust compliance will be the way you would do your VAT returns. Okay, now it'll be every month. You'll have to submit your trust compliance to SARS, showcasing who are all the beneficial owners, the beneficiaries, the distributions, every single month. So that too will also be automated very soon. And real-time taxation is coming.
Phew. I don't know if we should be excited or not. Megan? Next question.
Hi, thank you. I'm a guest here and very stimulating conversation. Thank you. I'll definitely be joining. My name's Nick Bothma. I run a visual journalism agency that uses a technology to authenticate the images. So my question, Terence, and the panel is around information and technology. What's your view on the role of the media and the control of the information that's used for people in the markets, for everything today? Where do you see it going, and who's controlling that, and what's your view on where that is going?
Yeah, media is very interesting. I had the opportunity to try out a piece of software that was developed out in Israel. Extremely powerful social media software where it keeps track of media and sentiment. So everything that's happening within social media with regards to identifying news that moves a certain asset class. You could tailor the piece of software to really keep an eye on everything within social media and media to ensure you're always on point with where the market is. So that's what's out there. And interestingly, this piece of software is equally powerful to utilize for intelligence. That's how powerful this piece of software is. And when we're talking about intelligence, I mean, your guess is as good as mine which department that'll be. But again, this is now available to the retail consumer, and very powerful tool to utilize as well in your investing or trading or keeping an eye. So it filters all of that information. And again, to the point you made, you also need to verify a lot of the information that's out there in the media now, including images, because there's remarkable editing software, I mean, beyond just Photoshop compared to back in the day, what is available now. So that all needs to be verified because it's easy to get led astray without that verification. So, but the software packages are there and out there. Some are more boutique than they are mass retail.
Thanks. Good evening. My name is Beverly Schaefer. I sit on the B20 digitization policy task team for the B20 that we'll submit to the G20. I think the biggest concern regarding digitization is the fact that you've got 350 million young people in Africa that will be adults by 2030, and we have not even begun to be involved in the technology race. And so the question really comes to the fact that what are we going to do as a continent? We haven't talked about the African Union, and I think that might be let's just say that I actually think there's a place for the African Union now to really rise together as a continent, because once Trump and geopolitics has settled and everything goes back to an accepted level, we'll still have the same problems we've got, as well as we're going to still have to solve our own problems. And we're not actually talking about that. And there's power in the room in terms of private sector being able to solve those problems for Africa by Africans based on the fact of the skills that we need. Otherwise, we as a continent, no matter how innovative we are here today, dealing with the international markets are going to be left behind. We've got 35 million South Africans that earn less than 1,000 rand a month. What are we going to do about that? We have to think of generations ahead of our time in order to have a thriving society. And we need to talk about pertinent issues that are affecting us and our children. Thanks.
Any thoughts on the African Union's role in our discussions overall?
No.
And its role?
I can have a stab. Beverly, I think we were on a B20 call together last week. Well, at least the African Union is now part of the G21, so that's helpful. At least we're in the conversation now. And we were talking earlier this evening about the potential across Africa and how that is starting to be unleashed. What I am clear about is that it has to happen from within Africa. There's been a lot of money thrown at Africa through the years, and it's not the issue. We as Africans, if I can call myself that now, we as Africans have to make it happen for ourselves. and sometimes the necessity is the mother of all invention. So maybe withdrawal of, dare I say it, US aid might help eventually, I hope, despite all the suffering it's causing in the near term. But that as Africa has to become self-sufficient. Whether we can become collectively as an entire continent, I think that's a big ask for me. You know, this number of countries, this landmass, this different cultures. But the African Union has a coordination role to play, I think, in terms of, you know, the lessons from Rwanda we were talking about earlier. Amazing things they've done there. Not all amazing, but some amazing things. South Africa does some amazing things. Let's share those. And I think that coordination role from the African Union can be very powerful. I think the stat is 1 in 3 working people will live in Africa by 2050, something crazy like that. I hope they are working. I hope we get it right. Because if we don't get it right, it's going to be a big, big problem.
Can I take 2 more questions? 1 more question? Maybe 2, but let's, depending on whether it's a speech or a question, but let's take 1 or 2. Anything burning before we conclude the panel? Or 0 questions? Okay, final thoughts, gentlemen. Cregan, let's start with you. Just parting thoughts, what would you like to leave us with and take away based on the discussions that we had this evening?
Final thoughts, I would say, I don't think we've got a greater population group than South Africans. We're resilient. We thrive everywhere that we go. I think we are a powerful bunch of people. And I think that in itself is our superpower. That's me.
Totally agree with that. Well said. I think my parting thought would be, listen, as the world changes, and it is changing before our eyes, there is an enormous amount of noise. Try and find the signal, if you can. It's part of my job, our job, to try and do that as well. It is difficult. One way to do it is always go to the primary source of information. If there's a speech, please read it. Don't just take what CNN headline you see about it, because the media is not trusted for a good reason. Because they lie a lot, they edit inappropriately a lot, and if you go to the primary source, you'll find out what's actually going on and take your own view. And you'll need to have that as the world changes around you, because it's changing right now.
Yeah, I think my advice and thoughts would be not to get too lost in the volatility of things. There's good old sayings, for example, the trend is your friend. In going to the primary source and developing your own view, you'll also establish where the financial markets are. And when I say financial markets, this is ultimately where you will execute any of your trading strategies or investment strategies as well. You need to go to the marketplace. So don't get too caught up in why Trump is doing what he's doing and what he's doing. Understand the risk you need to manage and identify that risk you need to manage and manage that risk very well. The trend is your friend. And the volatility creates great opportunity to move between asset classes as well, from those arbitrage opportunities. And you find out that there's some funds that have done extremely very well during these times. So don't be caught out and be part of that success story as well. And being in South Africa, to Keegan's point, I mean, this is a fantastic asset class from currency to equities to bonds as well. So don't get left out of the show. Get involved. So that will be my advice.
And that $1 million is possible.
And that $1 million is possible.
Okay. All right. So we know who to speak to.
You know who to speak to.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Guys, please just give them another round of